There is something it is like to be you, right now. That sentence seems obvious, trivial even. But it contains what may be the hardest problem in all of science. Not the origin of the universe, not the nature of dark matter, not the mechanics of black holes. Those problems are hard in the ordinary sense. We lack data, we lack instruments, we lack mathematics powerful enough to reach them. But they are, at least in principle, the kind of problems science knows how to approach. They live outside us, in the world, where our tools can find them. This problem is different. This problem sits inside the very instrument we use to do all the science. It is the problem of why there is something it is like to be you at all. And it has resisted every attempt, from every direction, for as long as we have been attempting it. In 1994, a young philosopher named David Chalmers stood up at a conference in Tucson, Arizona, and announced to a room full of neuroscientists, cognitive scientists, and philosophers that consciousness was not one problem, but two, and that one of them was, by his careful estimate, genuinely unsolvable by any method we currently possess. The room did not agree. It has not agreed since. But in the 30 years that have followed, no one has convincingly shown him to be wrong. David Chalmers was born in 1966 in Sydney, Australia. He was trained as a mathematician before turning to philosophy. And that background shows in everything he writes. He does not work in the sweeping, impressionistic style of the continental tradition. He works like someone building a proof, slowly, methodically, sealing every exit before moving to the next room. His arguments are designed to be escaped, and they have survived 30 years of escape attempts largely intact. His 1996 book, The Conscious Mind, In Search of a Fundamental Theory, opens with a distinction that sounds simple but cuts to the bone. There are what he calls the easy problems of consciousness, and then there is the hard problem. The easy problems are not, in fact, easy. Explaining how the brain processes sensory information, integrates signals from different modalities, sustains focused attention, generates language, regulates wakefulness and sleep, encodes and retrieves memory. These are staggering scientific achievements still in progress. They may take another century to fully resolve. Some may never be resolved in full, but they are easy in one specific technical sense. They are problems where we can, at least in principle, see what a solution would look like. A solution would be a mechanistic account, a description of how neurons and circuits and electrochemical cascades produce a given cognitive function. Science knows how to pursue that kind of answer. It has the tools, it has the methods. The path is not short, but it exists. The hard problem is different. The hard problem asks, why does any of this feel like anything? When you see the color red, your visual cortex processes light at a wavelength of approximately 700 nanometers. We can describe this process in extraordinary detail. Photons travel from the surface of an object, pass through the lens of the eye, strike the retina, activate the cone cells sensitive to longer wavelengths, send signals down the optic nerve, arrive at the primary visual cortex at the back of the brain, then propagate forward through a cascade of processing regions that extract edges, colors, shapes, motion, meaning. All of that is the easy problem, the science of vision, the neuroscience of color perception. The hard problem is the redness itself, the vivid, private, qualitative character of what red looks like from the inside, not the wavelength, not the neural activation, the experience. The felt quality of perception, what philosophers call qualia, singular quali. The fact that seeing red is not merely processing information about red, but is a particular way the world announces itself to you. Chalmers argues with rigorous patience that no amount of functional explanation will ever account for this, not because the science is incomplete, but because functional explanation is, by its nature, the wrong kind of explanation for the job. To understand why, consider the thought experiment at the heart of his argument, the philosophical zombie. A philosophical zombie, P-zombie in the shorthand of the literature, is a being physically identical to a human in every conceivable way, same atoms, same neurons, same synaptic connections, same behavioral repertoire, same responses to stimuli, If you stub your toe, you wince and say it hurts. The pea zombie stubs its toe, winces, says it hurts, completely indistinguishable from the outside. But inside, there is nothing. No experience. No qualia. The lights are on, and no one is home. It processes information, produces language, navigates the world. But there is nothing it is like to be this creature. Darkness, all the way down. Chalmers asks, is such a being conceivable? Not possible. Conceivable. Can we imagine a world, physically identical to ours, in which all the same biological processes occur, all the same behavior results, but in which there is no phenomenal experience? No felt redness, no sensation of pain, no experience of joy? He argues, yes, we can. And if we can, if there is no logical contradiction in the concept of a being physically identical to us, but without inner experience, then phenomenal consciousness is not entailed by physical structure. It is something additional, something that a complete physical description of the universe would leave out. This is what Chalmers calls the explanatory gap, a term first coined by the philosopher Joseph Levine and sharpened by Chalmers into the centerpiece of the hard problem. Even if neuroscience gave us a perfect, complete map of every neuron, every synapse, every electrochemical event in the human brain over the course of a lifetime, we would still be facing a question that map could not answer. Why is there an experience accompanying all of this? Why isn't it just processing, running silently, in the dark, like software with no screen attached? The standard physicalist response to this is not foolish, it deserves to be heard. Physicalism, the view that everything, including the mind, is ultimately physical, ultimately describable in the language of physics, answers Chalmers by saying, you feel the gap is unbridgeable because you are confused. Consciousness is not something over and above brain function. When you ask why experience accompanies neural processing, you are asking a malformed question, like asking what lies north of the North Pole. There is no extra ingredient. There is only the brain, and what brains do is, among other things, to have experiences. The mystery is not in the world. It is in our framing. The most sophisticated version of this response comes from Daniel Dennett. Dennett's 1991 book, Consciousness Explained, retitled, by Chalmers and others, Consciousness Explained Away, argues that phenomenal consciousness, as Chalmers describes, it is not a real thing to be explained, but a kind of cognitive illusion. Not in the trivial sense that experience doesn't happen. Clearly something is happening. But within the sense that our introspective picture of consciousness as a rich inner theater, with a clear observer watching a vivid qualitative display, is a narrative the brain constructs, not a metaphysical fact about what is actually occurring. When you think you are directly witnessing your own qualia, you are not. You are reading a compressed report your brain produced about its own states. The richness is, in a precise sense, invented. Chalmers finds this response inadequate, not because it is incoherent, but because it is, at its core, a change of subject. When Dennett explains consciousness, what he explains is the functional role of consciousness, how the brain integrates information, generates self-reports, builds a narrative of a unified self over time. These explanations are real and valuable, but they all remain inside the easy problem. They explain what consciousness does, without touching why it feels like something to have it. Chalmers puts it this way: you could explain all of this from the outside, in purely functional terms, and the hard problem would remain. You could give a complete neuroscientific account of every process involved in human experience, and still, at the end, face the same question unanswered. Why is there experience at all, rather than just function? Saying the question is confused is not the same as answering it. So, if physicalism struggles here, if the explanatory gap does not close under the pressure of functional description, what alternatives remain? Chalmers does not retreat to theology. He does not invoke a soul in the religious sense. He proposes something more philosophically careful and, in a way, more unsettling. He proposes that phenomenal properties, qualia, experience, the texture of awareness may be fundamental features of reality. Just as mass, charge, and spin are fundamental in physics, not explained in terms of anything simpler, simply posited as basic features of the world, experience may be fundamental in nature. Not produced by the brain from nothing, not an emergent accident of complexity, but present wherever the right kind of information processing occurs. A basic feature of what matter is, at some level of organization. This position, property dualism or naturalistic dualism in Chalmers' preferred framing, has a consequence that many find disturbing. It leads, through a sequence of plausible steps, toward panpsychism, the view that consciousness, or something like it, is a pervasive feature of the physical world. Not intelligence, not self-awareness, not anything resembling human cognition, but experience. The capacity for there to be an inside, distributed, in attenuated form, throughout matter itself. Panpsychism has a long and respectable history that its critics prefer not to mention. Spinoza gestured toward it. Leibniz built a sophisticated version of it. William James took it seriously, as did Bertrand Russell in certain moods. In the contemporary literature, philosophers like Galen Strawson and Philip Goff have defended it with rigor and without embarrassment. Chalmers himself is cautious about full endorsement. He treats it as a live hypothesis rather than a settled conclusion, but he treats it with more seriousness than the mainstream is comfortable with. The underlying intuition is this: if there is a genuine explanatory gap between the physical and the phenomenal, if experience cannot, even in principle, be derived from purely non-experiential matter, then perhaps the phenomenal was never absent. Perhaps it was always present, in some form, woven into the fabric of things, waiting to be organized by sufficiently complex structures into what we recognize as minds. This sounds strange. It sounds like animism. But Chalmers argues it is actually less mysterious than the alternative. To say that consciousness simply emerges from non-conscious matter at some threshold of complexity, that below a certain level of neural sophistication there is nothing it is like to be a brain, and then, at some critical point the lights suddenly switch on, is to posit something genuinely miraculous. Emergence is a legitimate concept in science. It explains how water is wet, even though no individual molecule is wet. It explains how ant colonies exhibit intelligence no individual ant possesses. But no one has shown how it could generate experience from non-experience. That is not emergence. That is conjuring. What does any of this mean? At the level of daily life, very little changes. The hard problem does not tell you how to vote, what to fear, how to spend your years. It does not, by itself, alter the workings of any market or policy or institution. Philosophy rarely does, directly. But at the level of how we understand the universe and our position within it, the hard problem is not a peripheral concern. It is a wound in the center of our scientific self-image. Science is built on a particular kind of authority, the authority of the third-person view. Science advances by removing the observer's perspective, by finding descriptions that hold from anywhere or from nowhere, descriptions that are impersonal, reproducible, universal. This is science's great power and its great achievement. The laws of thermodynamics are not about anyone's experience of heat. The equations of quantum mechanics make no reference to the felt qualities of any particular mind. Science speaks from outside. But consciousness is irreducibly first person. It is, by definition, the view from somewhere. The redness of red is not a property of light at 700 nanometers. It is a property of what it is like to see that light from inside a particular kind of nervous system. It does not appear in any equation. It cannot be shared in a paper, only described. You can describe its causes, its correlates, its functional role, but the experience itself withdraws from every third-person description, like an object that disappears when you try to measure it directly. This is why Chalmers believes the hard problem may require not the abandonment of science, but an expansion of it. an expansion to include first-person facts alongside third-person ones, to accept that a complete picture of reality must somehow account for the inside as well as the outside. The most consequential domain for this question is not history or ethics. It is artificial intelligence. We are building systems of astonishing complexity, systems that generate language, reason through problems, respond to inputs in ways that are, in some contexts, functionally indistinguishable from human cognition. The question of whether these systems are conscious is not merely a philosophical puzzle for rainy afternoons. It has ethical weight that we are not prepared to handle. If a sufficiently complex AI system has phenomenal experience, if there is something it is like to be it, then what we do to that system matters in a way that is morally serious. If it can suffer, we have obligations to it. If it has preferences, violating them is not simply deleting a file. And if such systems are proliferating at speed, being copied and modified and shut down and repurposed by the billions, we may be doing something of vast moral consequence without the slightest ability to know it. And we have no method for determining any of this. We have no consciousness meter. We have no test that distinguishes a philosophical zombie from a genuinely experiencing mind. The Turing test, which most people reach for, tests functional behavior, not phenomenal experience. Every measure we have developed is a measure of the easy problem, of output, of function, of behavior. The hard problem remains by its nature, unreachable from outside. This may not be a temporary gap, closed when neuroscience matures. It may be permanent. It may be that the question, is this system conscious? Is there anyone home? Is, for beings like us, forever unanswerable from the third-person view. We will build minds. We may already have. And we will not know whether they feel anything. We will treat them as products, as infrastructure, as code, to be optimized and retired. And we may be wrong about all of it. There is something vertiginous in this, not in a performed, dramatic way, but in the quiet, architectural way that discovering a load-bearing wall can change your understanding of a room you have lived in for years. Consciousness is not a detail. It is not a feature to be explained once the more important things have been settled. It is the only thing any of us has ever directly experienced. Everything else, the physical world, other minds, the laws of physics, the passage of time, is inference. Derived, constructed from signals. Consciousness alone is immediate. It is the one thing you cannot be wrong about by having it. And we do not know what it is. David Chalmers still works. He teaches at New York University. He writes and argues and responds to objections with the patience of someone who has been making the same point for 30 years and expects to be making it for 30 more. He has not solved the hard problem. He would be the first to say so. What he has done is make it sharper, more clearly bounded, more obviously real. There is a particular kind of intellectual courage in this. In a field where the pressure is always toward solution, toward closure, toward answers that can be published and cited and built upon, Chalmers has spent a career insisting on a question. Insisting that a question which cannot currently be answered is still worth holding, that some questions are too important to pretend resolved. The universe, as far as we know, contains one class of objects that have an inside, objects that notice things, that find some things beautiful and others terrible, that build instruments to look at galaxies and write books about what it all means, that lie awake in the dark, unable to explain why the dark is dark to them. We are, as Carl Sagan said, the universe's way of knowing itself, but we do not know what that knowing is made of. We do not know why the lights are on. We only know with a certainty more absolute than any scientific measurement could provide that they are, because we are sitting inside them, right now, reading this in the dark.